Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be talking about support weapons. So as many of you guys know, the meta has shifted towards a tougher demographic in regards to the armies that we're facing. A lot of people are playing Death Guard because they're basically Warhammer 40k easy mode, Imperial Knights, and Chaos Knights, which are also very tough armor skew lists that are very hard to deal with. And fire dragons, although very good, are just not enough to deal with, the insane amount of knights and, vehicles and tough targets that we're seeing out in the meta unless you have a very specific plan with them, which usually just means investing a lot of points in fire dragon support, right? And, people have had success with that, but the problem is that that's not all of us. If we're building an all comers list that wants to, be able to deal with different types of armies, it's going to be hard to get the value out of 3 units of 5 fire dragons. You're going to have to, skew a little bit heavier into anti tank. But more people have been picking up on these support weapons. So, support weapons, there's two in particular that are actually really good into the current meta, and there's one that's a bit of an off meta pick that is really good into other targets. So, in this video, we're going to be going through support weapons, talking about why they're good in the meta and why they're effective, and how to use them in your games. So first, we're going to be going over the stats, weapons, and special rules of the different support weapons, looking at their strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies, and lastly, I'm going to show you guys how to position your support weapons effectively on the battlefield. So basically, we're going to skip over a couple things here and there because, some of these are exactly the same, but for all of the platforms, they're all going to have movement 7, toughness 6, save of 4 plus, 5 wounds, a 7-up leadership, and OC1. Now, this is actually a pretty good stat line for something that is an infantry unit. So remember, these are considered infantry. They're not considered vehicles anymore, and they did get a little bit of buff in their movement from the index days. They did lose a lot of their punching power, but they did gain a few things here and there. So as for the first support weapon, we have the D-Cannon, a 24-inch gun, D3 attacks, 3 up to hit, 16 strength, minus 4 AP, and D6 plus 2 damage is a wildly good profile into very tough vehicles and monsters. It also has the benefit of blast, so it can do decent damage into targets like Aeldari's Custodians and stuff like that. Very tough, hard to kill infantry. And we also have devastating wounds. Now, we do also have indirect fire, but remember, indirect fire is considerably nerfed. So unless you absolutely have to use it, you should be aiming to use these in a more direct fire function. And all of the support weapons also come with shuriken catapults, which, there's just something extra to maybe get a wound off of a model here and there, but they don't really do much. As for all of the support weapons' close combat attacks, they are just going to be basically like a Storm Guardian with no power weapon. So strength 3, AP 0, damage 1, hits on a 3 plus. As far as the D-Cannon's abilities, they do have the support weapon ability, which is shared among all the support weapons, which essentially means that they can actually go into a Guardian Defender unit. We'll talk about the specifics in just a second, but what this basically does is it reduces its toughness characteristic to 3 unless it is the last model left in the unit. Now, as for the actual special ability of the D-Cannon, it has the structural collapse ability. So each time this model makes an attack with its D-Cannon, you re-roll a damage roll of 1. This essentially means that for every failed invulnerable save, you will auto-kill a 4-wound model that, of course, doesn't have Feel No Pain. And if the unit is Titanic, you can re-roll the entire damage roll instead. So, of course, this is very powerful against Knights, who are pretty much dominating the meta right now, because you can re-roll damage rolls and basically have a more consistent output throughout the course of the game. And D-Cannons are actually, over the course of 5 turns, are a lot more efficient at dealing damage than fire dragons. So that is something to consider. D-Cannons do a lot more damage over the course of a full game than Fire Dragons will in certain builds. Okay, so let's talk about the support artillery rule. This basically just allows them to join a Guardian Defender unit as if they're a leader, right, in that same declare battle formation step in the beginning of the game. And they will count as part of that Guardians unit for the rest of the battle, and that unit's starting strength will be increased accordingly. Now, keep in mind, this just means that they blend into the unit. They basically become a Guardian. They still keep the same amount of wounds and saves and all that, but their toughness is reduced to 3. So just kind of like what we talked about before. And also, this model and any unit is joined to can no longer embark within a transport, which is fine because normally we don't want Guardians in transports anyway. So the big problem with the D-Cannon, according to a lot of the community, is the cost. It's 125 points, which puts it 5 more points than the next best thing, which is a squad of Fire Dragons. Now, in a single turn of shooting, Fire Dragons will far out exceed the potential damage that a D-Cannon can do, but I would argue that the D-Cannon's greater range and ability to join a Guardian Defender unit make it a safer choice for a long-term game plan. So if you're, kind of struggling with the standard 2 Fire Dragon list into Knights, you might want to consider putting a D-Cannon in your army because that's going to basically provide the same output over the course of the battle as 2 additional Fire Dragon units. With some exceptions, obviously, because, Fire Dragons have the rerolls and the aspect tokens, but unless you roll 1s, if you have an army that has access to Guide and Doom, which you probably should if you're taking Guardian Defenders, then the D-Cannon can perform very well over the course of the battle, even at 125 points. Okay, and also, obviously, it has the infantry keyword, so it can move through ruins just fine, unlike its index counterpart, which was a vehicle. All right, let's talk about the Shadow Weaver. So we have the same stats here as the D-Cannon, of course, but its weapon is very, very different. So, unlike the D-Cannon that wants to be targeting the heaviest units in the game, the Shadow Weaver wants to be targeting hordes, very light infantry, things like Imperial Guardsmen, cultists, other Eldar, right? Things that are toughness 3, because it really does want to wound on a 2, or at the most a 3 against, tougher targets, things like orcs and stuff like that. As far as its rules, of course, it has a 48-inch range, which will pretty much hit the entire board, d6 plus 2 shots, with blast, hits on a 3, strength 6, AP minus 1, damage 1, and it does, of course, have indirect fire. This thing will mostly be firing indirectly because it's not something you necessarily want on a Guardian unit, just because of the fact that it is better as a long-range support in your backfield. Your Guardians really want to be more in the, not the midfield, but kind of more, towards the end of your deployment zone rather than the back of your deployment zone. Now, as for its ability, it makes it even better against hordes. So basically what you do is you shoot an enemy unit, and until the start of your next turn, that enemy unit is snared. And while it's snared, each time it makes a normal advance or fallback move, you roll 1d6 for each model in that unit. For each one, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So, basically, if it's forced to make some kind of move, on the roll of a 1, you will suffer damage. So basically, think about a unit that is moving in its movement phase, it's going to suffer damage. If it has to move in its shooting phase for whatever reason, maybe another stratagem or ability, it will take the damage again. So it is for each one though, so it can be kind of swingy, but typically speaking, when I've run these, it does a lot of damage to single wound models. So really good against Tyrannid swarms, guard swarms, even Gene Stealer cult swarms, I would say, and other single wound infantry like orc mobs and stuff like that. And it is only 75 points, so it's actually very affordable, but here's the drawback to the Shadow Weaver. As you guys have probably already realized, it doesn't do jack against single entity, huge models. It doesn't do anything against big squads of, heavily armored infantry that has multiple wounds. So if your opponent's running a squad of 6, Death Shroud Terminators, it's basically, it might do 1 mortal wound and that's it, right? It's not going to kill a model with every roll of a 1. It's also not going to be able to do anything against vehicles and, those kind of units either. So it's really only good against a certain type of enemy. If you're fighting hordes, it's very effective. If you're not, then it's just not going to be that good. So I would say the Shadow Weaver is a good unit, but we're not in a horde meta. So unfortunately, it's just not going to be used in competitive play. However, if you are fighting hordes in your local community and you're wondering what is a better way to deal with them, put 2 of these in your army, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. They are very good at clearing hordes. Okay, let's talk about the Vibro Cannon. So the Vibro Cannon has quickly become one of my favorite support weapons. I actually like it more than the D-Cannon, believe it or not, because of its versatility. So its weapon is, of course, the Vibro Cannon. I used to lovingly call this the Vibrator Cannon that you could find at your local CVS in the family planning section, but it's actually extremely good now. I would say that this is no longer a meme unit. It actually has a purpose, and it's actually very good for the points. So it has 48-inch range. It doesn't have indirect fire, but it does have D6 attacks, hitting on 3+, strength 9, AP -1, damage 2. Now, looking at the stats alone, this thing seems really bad. And you would be right. The stats are mediocre for its cost. However, its special ability is really where it shines. So if we look at its special rule, Sonic Destruction, each time this model makes an attack with its Vibro Cannon that targets an enemy unit, you improve the strength, armor penetration, and damage characteristics of that attack by 1 for each other friendly Vibro Cannon platform model that made 1 or more attacks with its Vibro Cannon that also targeted that enemy unit this phase. And basically, to break this down for you, you don't even need to hit with the Vibro Cannon. As long as you just target the enemy unit with the Vibro Cannon, subsequent Vibro Cannons will get that bonus. So the first Vibro Cannon shooting is going to get strength 9, AP -1, damage 2. Not that great, but this is, just the start. The second Vibro Cannon is going to get strength 10, AP -2, damage 3. So all of a sudden, we're punching into light and medium vehicles at a reasonable rate for its cost. Then the third Vibro Cannon is going to shoot, and you're going to get strength 11, AP -3, and damage 4. So now the Vibro Cannon is just going to be absolutely wrecking stuff. Now, on top of this, you can also give the Vibro Cannon some bonuses. Bonuses like Guide, Doom, to really make it hit hard. But even at 180 points, this is a really good buy, especially against armies that are going to be running a lot of vehicles. A lot of people have problems with Death Guard. Well, as a matter of fact, Death Guard are very susceptible to Vibro Cannons because a lot of their vehicles, their little bloat drones, only have 10 wounds. So that means you can pretty easily shoot them out of the sky with a couple Vibro Cannons. So a couple of damage 2s to warm up, a couple of damage 3s to really put it on its last, kind of legs, and damage 4s to seal the deal. 3 Vibro Cannons can effectively kill 1 of those every single turn. Now, of course, they could shoot back, and of course, Death Guard do have pretty good long-range shooting, and they could kill, but the good thing about support weapons is that they're also pretty durable to indirect fire because they have toughness 6, so that strength 8, of the, Plague Burst Crawlers is just going to be wounding them on 3s, which does make a difference, and they are going to be getting a relatively decent save, and they have quite a few wounds apiece. So it's going to take probably a couple of Plague Burst Crawlers with good rolls to be able to kill at least only 1 of them. So, this is also saving your aspect units, right? Your aspect units of Warp Spiders and stuff like that that you want to save for later in the game. If your opponent chooses to shoot the Vibro Cannons instead, then they're really not going to make much headway on the rest of your list. And I think this is the best part about the Vibro Cannon. It's only 60 points. It is very cheap and affordable. So you can easily take 3 of these in your list and not really be, putting yourself at a disadvantage against other targets. And because Vibro Cannons are pretty good into most medium to heavy targets in the game, they're good for all comers lists. So if you want to bring 3 Vibro Cannons along in your tournament list, just in an all comers format, they do pretty well in that because there's no real matchup in which they absolutely suck in. Okay, let's talk about their strengths and weaknesses. So their strengths are that each platform has high damage against their intended targets for the cost. So Vibro Cannons have really high damage for their cost into light, medium, and sometimes even heavier vehicles with support. D-Cannons have very good damage into the heaviest targets in the game, Titanic units and knights and stuff like that, just heavy vehicles and monsters in general. And Shadow Weavers have good damage into hordes. They all have a pretty good range. The D-Cannon's the shortest, but it still has a 31-inch threat range if you move it 7 inches. And they also sometimes have indirect fire. So unless it's the Vibro Cannon, they have the benefit of indirect fire, just in case you really can't see something that you really need to kill. They all have powerful abilities that synergize with the damage type they deal also. However, their weaknesses are they're relatively low in durability, right? They're not very durable. They're basically just like a, Viper, but even more fragile than a Viper. Their damage can be a little bit unreliable when firing indirectly because you hit on a 4+ and there's really no way to improve that. You don't get rerolls anymore for the Eldar for the most part, so unfortunately that's not going to be able to be helped with things like guide and so forth. And they don't have battle focus when they're unattached. This may not seem like a big deal. If they're attached to Guardian Defender units, they get battle focus like everything else, but if they're alone, they don't have the special rule. So this means that you can't, make them immune to Overwatch. You can't give them +2 movement. So you do have to think about those things as well. As far as their combos and synergies go, Guide and Doom really boost the damage dealing abilities when they're shooting. Of course, Guide is only good on direct fire, but again, when you have something in the middle of the battlefield, you want to prioritize firing directly with them and then using other abilities or stuff like that to protect them afterward. Shroud Runners can also remove cover from enemy units, which helps them immensely also. Guardian Battle Host is perhaps their most secure home because it gives them +1 to hit when on or targeting enemies on objectives and has the strats that allow wound rerolls and or pistol if it's in a Guardian Defender unit. And there's nothing better than firing a Vibro Cannon directly into a unit that's in combat with you. It is pretty fun, honestly. Especially if it's a vehicle. So I've had situations before where somebody charges a Dreadnought into my Guardian Defenders, kills like 5-6 defenders, and just my defenders can't really do anything in combat. I activate the stratagem, I fire the Vibro Cannon into them, and then I fire other Vibro Cannons into that Dreadnought and just totally wipe it out. And now the threat is dealt with. Seer Council also gives them a few buffs. So Seer Council gives them a stratagem that basically allows them to be a lone op 18. So this is really good at protecting D-Cannons that are just outside of enemy range, especially against indirect fire. So we were talking about that a little bit earlier. And it gives them the ability to teleport across the battlefield. So, potentially you could teleport something like a Vibro Cannon into the enemy deployment zone and score some points on Linebreaker. They're very small, they're very hard to screen out, and they can still do some damage. So you could teleport a Vibro Cannon over there and then triangulate your other Vibro Cannons into something that's substantial like a vehicle or a monster and bring it down. So pretty cool. And, anytime you can do damage and score points with something in the same turn, that's really good. So both of those detachments are really good for them. However, you could also put them in other detachments just because they're good on their own. I would say that their cost is, unless it's a D-Cannon, their cost is relatively low enough to be effective in this meta. So even at 125 points, if you're, going up against a lot of Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights and Death Guard, 125 points for a D-Cannon is actually pretty reasonable if you're able to give it Guide and Doom. You can pretty reliably kill big stuff with that. Okay, guys, we are going to start talking about how to kind of deploy your support weapons on the battlefield and how to maneuver them accordingly. Now, I will say this. It's pretty simple to know where to put your support weapons, but I will go ahead and show you guys kind of some good spots on the battlefield, and we're going to be using terrain layout number 5. Somebody mentioned if I could use it, so we're going to be using it for this battle. For the most part, support weapons should be with guardian units, hugging terrain, or be in the back of your backfield or in reserve. So keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and dive into our tabletop simulator example. Alrighty, welcome to our tabletop simulator example where we will be talking about support weapons, how to deploy them, how to use them in your games, and what they're good at. So we have a couple of things that I want to go ahead and show you guys about support weapons in regards to dealing with both heavy and light targets. So there are 2 support weapon types, as I said previously in the video, that are good against lighter to heavier vehicles. And those are the D-Cannons and the Vibro Cannons. So a lot of people don't think Vibro Cannons are very good against heavier targets, but actually they can be quite good into the new Night meta and the Death Guard meta. Now, why is that? Well, they have a really long range. They gain strength, AP, and damage for each subsequent Vibro Cannon that hits its target as well. So these guys can actually get to strength 11, AP -3, and damage 4, which will put a lot of, bloat drone type enemies or, kind of predator equivalent enemies in the grave. So really good at killing light to medium vehicles, and can even punch into stuff like knights if you have the right synergies in the army. And I'll show you in just a second what 180 points worth of Vibro Cannons can do to an Imperial Knight. The other option is the D-Cannon, which of course is really good against heavier targets, but can also deal with light and medium vehicles and monsters. And lastly, we have the Shadow Weaver, which is not really meta right now, but is very interesting against horde armies. So, if you're playing in a competitive teams tournament or something like that, the Shadow Weaver is actually one of the best tools for anti-horde. So if your opponent's team has someone who's playing, endless wave nids, just a bunch of little bugs, or Imperial Guard, 300-man army, or whatever, right? Just bunch of infantry, far as the eye can see, Shadow Weavers are going to be your friend. And I would even say Guard Recon is probably the army that people are going to play with that, and Recon is a choice in competitive play when it comes to teams. So Shadow Weavers can be good in that matchup. So first thing I want to show you guys is the D-Cannon tech. Now we've already talked about this on the channel a couple times, but the D-Cannon with Guardian units is actually the way to do it. Now you don't want to run D-Cannon solo typically. I think D-Cannons are really at home in a Guardian battle host, but if you just want to have a Guardian defender squad in a war host list, for example, I don't think a single D-Cannon platform is necessarily a bad thing. It gives you a little bit of indirect when you need it, and it also gives you a high punching power into certain targets. Okay. Oh, and also, kind of a cool thing, but remember that the D-Cannon platform actually does benefit from the Warhost stratagem that gives sustained hits within 12. So honestly, you're probably not going to be within 12 of a D-Cannon, but if something comes close to your Guardian squad, you can definitely let rip and get sustained hits on your D-Cannon, which is pretty cool, right? So there are some kind of cool things you can do with it. Obviously, it's not ideal to use that stratagem on a D-Cannon, but you'd be surprised, you'd be surprised how many 6s you can sometimes roll just when you need it. Anyway, so standard though, what can 2 D-Cannons do to something like an Imperial Knight? Now, obviously, the Wraith Knight is going to be nowhere near as good as an Imperial Knight, but D-Cannons, if they have line of sight to it, can do considerable damage. So we talked about this in an earlier Guardian Battle Host video, but there is an enhancement that gives a 4+ overwatch to the unit. You'd probably have a Farseer up here as well. And the Guardian unit can overwatch with its heavy weapon platform and D-Cannon platform. So, if the Wraith Knight or Imperial Knight or whatever the big target is, the Titanic unit, walks into the midboard to try to get shots off on something, maybe right here just to get a little bit of cover, we can now shoot it with the D-Cannon and the Bright Lance. If a Farseer's in the unit, the Bright Lance, of course, can, auto hit 6 if it needs to, but of course, most of the time, you're just going to roll a 4 up. D-Cannon is the same way, but you can't use the Farseer's ability on the D-Cannon. So D-Cannons are pretty cool when they fire directly. If you're on an objective, which our unit is, we're going to get +1 to hit. So already, we're just going to go ahead and, roll our number of attacks. We're going to get 2 attacks, so we'll keep that. And we're going to hit on 4s, and keep in mind, if we're overwatching, we're just hitting on 4s because of the enhancement. But if we're shooting it, we're actually hitting on 2s because we hit on 3s and then we get the +1 to hit. So even on 4s, right, that sucked. But on average, you should get at least 1 of these to hit. And then, yeah, let's just assume we get 1 hit because that's average. And then we roll to wound, we wound, and then the Imperial Knight takes its 5-up invul save. And it misses it, so that's just D6 + 2 damage, which we do get to re-roll the damage on because it's a Titanic unit. So we roll our dice, we get a 5, so that's 7 damage unanswered against an Imperial Knight. And that's just, with a simple 4+ overwatch. Of course, if we, just fire it normally, we're hitting on 2s, right? We probably command re-roll that, guys, to be honest, right? We get 2 hits. We're wounding on 2s probably because of Eldrad and the D-Cannon's really high strength. So we get 2 wounds, they take 2 saves, they make 1, and we do another 7 damage. So as you can see, 125 points worth of D-Cannon can actually pretty much take out a fourth of a knight in a single shot, which is pretty good. And again, we're not even accounting for, the second D-Cannon or perhaps even the Bright Lances as well. So if you have a Guardian Battle Host list with a couple of D-Cannons, Bright Lances in your Guardian squads, a couple of Warwalkers, you should do very well into the Knight meta. Even if you're going up against, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Knights, you should be able to bring down consistently 1 big Knight a turn, or honestly, sometimes even 2 Knights, depending on what you have on the field, because you're going to have Guide, you're going to have +1 to hit, you're going to have Doom out there, and Knights, although really strong, are not going to be able to withstand that typically. So yeah, so D-Cannons are very good in that way. Now, the other cool thing about the D-Cannon in the Guardian squad is, remember, the Guardian unit gets a free fade back. So if this Imperial Knight shoots at the Guardians in your Guardian battle host and takes out 9 of them, and by the way, you can always put wounds on the Warlocks, kill the Warlocks off before you kill the Guardians, so you can go back and reserve, use cost of victory, and then the squad just returns on the board edge the next turn, right? So it just pops up right here within 6 inches of the board, pretty much as it was, a little bit farther back, but it's still right there. And because the D-Cannon has indirect fire, it can still shoot at, Knights in the midboard, albeit with a little bit less accuracy. So that's the D-Cannon Bright Lance combo in the Guardian units. I think this is really strong. It does cost a lot of points, but it is going to do consistent damage throughout the battle, and you are going to be able to realistically keep those units alive for the entire game if you play them correctly. Okay, now moving on to the Vibro Cannons. So I did want to showcase the Vibro Cannons really quick because a lot of people doubt them. They are a much cheaper version. They're about half the cost of a D-Cannon. But let me just show you what a couple of Vibro Cannons can do against a Knight. So let's say that they come in from reserve, and typically speaking, you're going to have them on Guardian units. But if you have the D-Cannons already, I think it might just be worth it to run these solo. Now, the reason being is because they still get the bonus from Guardian Battle Host. If you're running them in other detachments, you could still guide the Knight. Like if you have a Farseer, you can cast Guide on it to make sure these guys hit, right? Because we want to be hitting on 2s. That's kind of essential. We also want to be casting Doom on whatever we hit. So again, I know this is a little bit skewed, but most lists that are going up against knights are going to have some form of, at least in Guardian Battle Host, you're definitely going to have Eldred. You're definitely going to have Farseers. And if you're playing Seer Council or anything like that, you're also going to have that, right? So our 3 Vibro Cannons come in, and of course, we're just going to be able to, kind of stack them probably behind here. Again, it's cool because support weapons are so small, they can kind of just fit anywhere, which is nice. And you don't always have to put them in the same spot. Like if you can draw a line of sight to multiple areas, like if we want to go here with one, like come in right here, we can draw a line of sight, right? So we don't need to all come in here, but I'm just going to put them here for now. But obviously we could change the positions. Like we could have one come in right here, right? We could have one come in over here if we wanted to, if we had space to, kind of do that. So it really just depends on the state of the board. But anyway, we're going to put them right here just as a example. I mean, obviously this could change. So we shoot the Wraith Knight. Now the first one is just getting Strength 9, right? So we roll our D6 attacks here. We get 4 attacks. Pretty decent. We're hitting on 2s. Now Strength 9 against Toughness 11 is 5s, but with Doom it's 4s. So let's go ahead and roll our dice again, and we need 4s. Okay, so we get 2. That's going to be at AP -1. If we have a Warwalker involved, which I know is more, investment, but again, hear me out, against Knights, you really do need that investment to be able to bring them down. But anyway, let's assume we don't have a Warwalker, because I just want to show you guys what they can do with just a simple guide or detachment bonus from Guardian Battle Host and Doom. And they roll their saves, and they miss 1, so they take 2 damage. So the Knight's already taken 2. So let's just put this to the side here. Actually, yeah, we'll use this dice right here, and we'll just 2 damage so far. Okay, second one, D6 attacks. 4 attacks again. Okay, great. Hitting on 2s. And again, this is at strength 10 now, AP -2, damage 3. So we do miss 1. That's okay. We're wounding on 4s again. We get 1, and this is at AP -2. So did they get their save? Unfortunately, they do make it that time. That's okay. So our third one, go ahead and roll that. And again, if you low roll this last one, you might want to even command re-roll this one just so you can get more dice, right? Like that's a well-placed CP right there. So we get 5. Boom, we're hitting on 2s. All of them hit. We're wounding on 3s now because we're up to strength 11. So we're going to wound on 3s. We get all our wounds. Do they make their saves at 5 up? Let's find out. No, they don't. So guess how much damage we just did to that knight right there? Because these are damage 4 apiece. We just, and I know they should have made some, but the last Vibro Cannon didn't do anything, so we're just gonna call it even. This is going to be 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. We just did 20 damage with a Vibro Cannon. With a 60-point model, we did 20 damage. Now, a lot of you guys will say, oh, well, Proxy Hammer, that's not really average, is it? Well, no, but potentially we can do a lot of damage with these things. And even if we, look at this, watch. Even if we made 2 of these saves on average on the night, they're still taking 12 damage with a Vibro Cannon. So overall, we've done 14 damage. We have half-shotted a knight. We have taken a knight from full health to about half with 180 points. That is a pretty good return on investment for the Vibro Cannon because most knights are going to be around 400 points. I know they got a huge point decrease, but that knight is now going to be easily taken out by things like Warwalkers and stuff like that. And like I said before, if we had a Warwalker going in there, we would have been doing more damage from the beginning. So there is also that. So Vibro Cannons can be very effective. Now, against regular vehicles, they're also really good, right? That would have one-shotted almost every vehicle in the game. Like a Land Raider could not withstand that, which is kind of hilarious, right? Predators are going to just fall to these things easily with Doom, right? And usually we're going to kind of cast either guide, or we're going to have these things on an objective or something like that. I will say this. They are the most effective in Guardian Battle Host, and that's kind of, I think, the main point of a lot of these, mathematical examples is that -1 or +1 to hit that you get in Guardian Battle Host. But also remember that other detachments have access to the Farseer that can essentially provide the same thing. So if you're looking for this, if you want to try these out in Warhost, you definitely can. Just keep in mind, they don't have battle focus unless they join a Guardian squad, a Guardian Defender squad specifically. Okay, so those are the Vibro Cannons. They can do some serious damage. Don't underestimate the Vibros. All right, so what's next? We have the Shadow Weaver. So the Shadow Weaver is a very off-meta pick, but if your opponent has something like this, right, and I have Chaos Cultists here, but this could be anything. This could be Guardsmen, this could be Orcs, whatever it is, right? I just want to show you the kind of damage that a single Shadow Weaver can do to a unit like that. So we roll our attacks. It's D6 plus 2. We get 4 attacks. And again, the initial attacks aren't really what's good, right? Because we're just going to hit on 4s here. We get 2 hits. We're going to wound on 2s because it's strength 6. We're going to get 2 wounds here. They're going to, make their saves. It's AP -1 or 2, I think. Well, it doesn't matter. Let's see. Well, they made them. Whatever. They rolled double 6s. So they're going to make those. That's okay, because next turn, we should have accounted for blast too, right? So we should have gotten, 4 more attacks on that? Should have, well, they all missed anyway. So that was a horrible roll. But the cool thing about this is now, if this unit wants to move, it's going to have to roll 20 dice. And for every 1, it's going to kill a guy. It's going to do a mortal wound. So we roll our dice, and 5 die from the mortals. And that's, I think that's probably average. So we just pick 5 up, right? And we didn't really have to do anything. We didn't have to see the unit. We didn't have to sacrifice an enemy or, an allied unit to destroy that unit. We didn't have to drop swooping hawks or warp spiders near them. We didn't have to do anything. We just had to shoot them with indirect fire. They're going to take a bunch of mortal wounds when they move next. And that's essentially what Shadow Weavers are good at. They're good at controlling hordes. So again, if you're in a competitive environment and you're on teams and your team says, we really need a faction that's good at anti-horde, and you have some, support weapons in your collection, raise your hand. Hey, be like, hey, I'll run triple Shadow Weaver, and, that orc mob, that orc boy squad or whatever, or that huge mob of, Imperial Guardsmen, they're going to just get blasted. And the great news about this is only 225 points of your army. And of course, the rest of it can be spent on things like Wind Riders with scatter lasers and Shroud Runners and all that good stuff if your opponent is just skewing hard towards, infantry. So they are a very good horde option. It's just that right now we're not in a horde meta. So of course, when you're not in a horde meta, you're just not going to take the Shadow Weaver seriously. But it does do very good against hordes. I mean, even you guys saw right there, even with a terrible, terrible roll, we still managed to kill 5 cultists just because the next time they move, they're going to suffer mortals. So very good ability with the Shadow Weaver. And I have to say, I think the support weapon abilities are really interesting, and I really applaud the people who wrote the Eldar Codex for giving the different weapon platforms different abilities. I still think this, guys. No matter where we are in the meta, I think the Eldar Codex was and still is the best designed codex of 10th edition. I really do. I think, honestly, most of the stuff in the codex, besides some of the stuff we already know sucks, right, is really good. And there's really only a couple of units in the codex that are kind of meh. And that is because GW singled them out to be terrible, because they were either really, really good in the index and they needed to be punished, or it's just because of the state of the game. Like, for example, the Night Spinner, they just didn't want it to be good, right? There are certain units like that, but for the most part, a lot of our stuff is really good. And the support weapons have a place, which is cool. So yeah, support weapons are very good. I think they're probably very underrated by a large part of the community. But if you actually roll some dice, do a little bit of math on some of these, they're actually really good into their chosen targets. Like D cannons are super good into knights, super good into knights. Vibro cannons are actually good into vehicles, and also they double up against heavy infantry. Like that damage 4 can really mess up Alarius Custodes, right? Those Terminator custodians with the 4 wounds, Vibro cannons can actually mess them up pretty good for a low cost. So again, if you're looking for a little bit of extra damage in your list and you have like a couple hundred points to spend and you're wondering, how do I kill heavy infantry, light vehicles, and medium vehicles? Maybe Vibro Cannons are your choice, right? If you already have a Farseer, perfect. Farseer can guide something, Eldrad can doom it, and then you let loose with the Vibro Cannons. If you're looking for some really heavy anti-large, like, maybe you're just like, man, I just am having the roughest time against knights. Maybe try Guardian Battle Host, right? Try running a couple Guardian Defender squads, maybe 2-3 Guardian Defenders with D cannons, and your problems with knights will be no more. Honestly, D cannons putting out an average of 10 shots per game per D cannon is 30 attacks. To just give you a reference point, if you have 3 squads of 5 fire dragons in your list, you are only really going to be able to deal 15 shots over the course of the game, because fire dragons are going to die. They're going to get up there and then they're going to, of course, be destroyed after they shoot. If you have a squad of 10 with Fuegan, chances are, unless you're an expert Eldar player and you are able to use the rest of your army to protect that fire dragon unit, your fire dragons are only going to be able to shoot once. If they get to shoot twice, you probably just win, right? Like if you get to shoot twice with Fuegan and 10 fire dragons, you've won the game. Like the knight player cannot do anything against you because you've killed probably 3 knights by now with that fire dragon squad, and it's just, that's it. They just can't do anything against you, plus whatever else you have in your army, right? So, yeah. D cannons, on the other hand, can play a much more passive game. Your opponent's going to have to rush you. You can, of course, screen them out, and then your D cannons can just have a field day when the enemy knights try to score objectives. And even against baby knights, D cannons can just absolutely maul them at short range. So if baby knights come up to like do actions on objectives and stuff like that, D cannons are totally fine just popping out and killing them. Otherwise, right, fire dragons aren't really comfortable with that because they need to be used for the bigger knights. And if your opponent is baiting you with little knights and you bring out all your fire dragons too early, then your opponent basically wins because then all the big knights get to just stomp your army. Whereas the D cannons have a little bit more play into some of the bigger knight armies. Chaos Knights included. I think Imperial Knights are obviously, between the two armies, they seem to be the better choice, but for competitive play at least. But yeah. Oh, and also another thing. D cannons are really good against they're really good against freaking Death Guard, right? Because how many times do you just see those stupid little bloat drones like fly up, and they just provide really good overwatch with the dual flamers, with anti-infantry 2+ and all that stuff, right? And your fire dragons, they get up into range, and oh, if I want to get into melter range, I'm going to be at -1 to hit. And it's just a bunch of bullshit, right? D cannons don't care. They just fire at 24 inches. They're outside of contamination range or, contagion range or whatever. And they can just hit really freaking hard against those units. And they have dev wounds. So there's a good chance you're going to be able, with 3 D cannons, there's a decent chance you'll get at least 1 dev wound in there. And that's going to punch a lot of damage through, especially with rerolls. So yeah, guys, that is the little bit of, support weapon magic here. There's really not much to support weapons. They're not a super, hard unit to use. They're pretty easy. They're long range fire support for the most part. And it's just about being able to bring as much damage to your enemy target as possible when you need it the most. So Vibro Cannons coming in on turn 3, coming in on turn 2 from reserve can just absolutely ice an Imperial Knight or do a significant amount of damage to it and maybe just come in and kill vehicles and stuff like that. They also have 48-inch range. Remember that as well. So they're really long-range weapon platforms. And of course, you have the D-Cannons who can also kind of, with the Guardian squads, they can fade back and pop in and out of terrain. And then lastly, if you are in a horde meta, because some people are, it depends where you live in the world, but, if you're in a meta that favors hordes a lot, and you play against a lot of NIDs, Unending Swarm, and that's what it's called, by the way, Unending Swarm, I believe. Or you play against, like Recon Guard, or anything that just has a ton of infantry, Shadow Weavers are a good pick. I would even say 2 Shadow Weavers in an army, 150 points, can pick up a lot of infantry models, light infantry models. Okay, guys, that is going to be it for our tabletop simulator example. And again, I hope you got a little bit out of this and can kind of understand where I'm coming from with support weapons. They are a pretty good choice. I've run triple Vibro Cannon. I thought they were, absolutely troll at the beginning of the 10th edition codex. I've changed my mind. I think they are very good. I have run D-Cannons. I think D-Cannons are very good under the right circumstances and the right builds. And unfortunately, Shadow Weavers, I just think they're a little bit off meta. They're not really meta right now, but if we were in a horde meta, they would be good. So, that is a thing. All right, guys, we're going to be back to the video in just a second. And yeah, let me know if you guys like these tabletop simulator examples. Again, I know I got a few positive comments on them last time, so we're going to keep them coming. But yeah, these guys can definitely do some damage, so consider taking them in your army. They are very good. All right, back to the video. All right, everybody, we are back, and in conclusion, support weapons offer considerable damage against their intended targets for a reasonable cost. As you guys saw in the tabletop simulator example, especially when you spike the dice on one of those Vibro Cannons, you can do insane amounts of damage to your intended target. And honestly, you could even one-shot a knight with the right numbers. And in this current meta, D-Cannons and Vibro Cannons deal super good damage into knights and Death Guard alike, and are even more powerful in the Guardian Battle Host. If you're running Guardian Battle Host, I think you should be looking at support weapons. Absolutely. I think they are the best choice for the detachment as far as your ranged weapons go. Also, Warwalkers, right? You definitely want Warwalkers, but you also definitely want support weapons. Unfortunately, when it comes to Shadow Weavers, they just don't do enough damage into heavy targets to be viable in the meta, and are really only good into light infantry and hordes. However, if you find yourself in one of those metas, like your local shop has a ton of guard players or has a ton of other Eldar players, then Shadow Weavers are actually really good. They just don't do damage into the competitive scene at the moment. However, here's the other bit of good news. The support weapon kit is one of the older GW kits, so it's very easy to actually use all 3 support weapons from a single kit, because the weapons actually just slot in. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, they just slot right in. There's basically a peg that you can put the support weapon into, and it can come in and out, and it's secure, right? It's pretty tight in there, but you can obviously just pop it right off and then put another weapon on it. So if you want to change from Vibro Cannons to D-Cannons, you can definitely do that. It's very easy to do. So yeah, that's all I got on support weapons for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for, supporting the channel and all that. I do want to mention real quick that the Eldar Knight Kickstarter has been successfully funded. And if you want to grab a physical copy of the Codex and you want to continue to support the Kickstarter, I do have late pledges available for you. So basically, if you want to get your hands on it, by the way, we have a new artist that is going to be working on the project with me to create the codex and really make it shine. So there's going to be art included and all that. I'm going to have a video out on that on the channel. You can check that out probably today. I'll probably have it up either already or by the end of today. Lastly, I want to let everybody know that if you do want to support the channel in other ways, I do have a Patreon. You can join by simply clicking the link in the description. And if you want access to our Discord community, you get it for absolutely free. So you can join a Patreon free trial and you can get access to the Discord that way. Or if you want to throw a couple bucks my way, you can become a Patreon member and you will get access to ad-free videos that are posted on the channel via Patreon. So either way, you win, basically. And I'll leave the link for that in the description. Also, have a channel store page and an Amazon affiliate link if you want to grab some discounted Eldar apparel or you want to grab some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching and have a good one. Peace out, everybody. See you later.